What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raff's, of course. We've got Jays Weekend for Days. Josh, how you doing?
I'm a big fan of your intramural champions shirt repping our team.
Thank you. I am a champion. Thank you. Thank you.
Glorious times.
Glorious times.
I will
Definitely, absolutely rode the bench to that. I was not. We were not the reason that we won our intramural championship, but
that is.
I was there. I contributed, and
we
really,
entered to the Champions League theme song.
And really, if you just show up for all or almost all of your intramural games, you should feel good about taking the I am the champion era, because that's
Yes.
the biggest hurdle, right? Is just
Correct.
getting the people who on a random Saturday in September and committed to a intramural basketball team, or in this case, a co-ed intramural soccer team. As long as you can get that person who committed in September to show up 7 times in a row when they're supposed to in late November and early December, then you've done your then we've done just a fine job.
I will never forget the fact that we got to enter to the Champions League theme song. It was a whole production for that final. Too funny.
Yes, it was. And I wear it with pride. That's 2018-19 intramural season at at Butler University. Week 2 of interviews, the second stage, if you will, of our college basketball preview series. We've been through all 6 of the power conferences, just Josh and I, and we're now circling back to talk about each conference with somebody who follows either a team in that conference closely or the conference as a whole. This week is the Pac-12 conference. Real quick on the Pac-12. The Pac-12 football conference this year is unbelievable. They've got like 11 teams in the top 25. It's unbelievable.
The Pac-12 is going out with a bang. And I mean, the stage is set for a pretty, at least interesting and potentially pretty good for Pac-12 standards basketball season too, at least on the men's side. Yeah. Pac-12 is not going quietly here.
And I'm pretty sure in the AP top 25 this week, you have, let's see. Is Texas really 3rd in this week's rank? That's crazy.
Yes.
Wow. How about that? Washington is 7th. USC is 8th. Oregon is 9th. There you go. 3 of the top 9. Now, granted, 0 of the top 6, but 3 of the top 9. 4 of the top 10. Utah is 10th. So 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, all Pac-12 teams. 16, Washington. That's a Pac-12 team. 19, Oregon State. That's a Pac-12 team.
Washington State, you mean?
Yeah, who'd I say?
Washington. You gave
Washington
2
State.
spots.
Sorry. Well, the state of Washington has 2 spots.
Yeah, there you go.
Washington State and then Oregon State. There you go. That's like 6 of the top 25. Good for them.
Mm-hmm.
Good for them. Well, Pac-12 college basketball on the men's side is the topic of conversation today, with one Connor Hope at Hoops Hope CBB on Twitter. He's a contributor to the Almanac. He was once upon a time part of Busting Brackets, the fan-sided college basketball page. He is now a big part of both the Almanac and the Heat Check College Basketball, co-host of the Heat Check College Basketball podcast called the Heat Check Hangout. He's all over the place, and he's also become the guy that we go to when we want to talk Pac-12 hoops. He was here last year. He's here this year, and it was good to send off the Pac-12 in their last season, probably ever, with Connor one more time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Always really good conversation with him. Love his passion for the Pac-12. It gets me excited.
Absolutely. We don't have to pull teeth with Connor when it comes to talking about the Pac-12. So that's something we very much enjoy. Without further ado, let's go talk to Connor about the Pac-12. Joining us now from many different places. Heat Check College Basketball, the Hangout, writer for the Almanac. He's Connor Hope. He is on Twitter at HoopsCBB. Connor, how are you today?
Doing great. You know, the season's approaching. College football has already started. Pac-12 is 13-0 in football, so it's fantastic. We've got what, 9 weeks until the season starts. That's crazy. So I'm excited.
Yeah, snuck up on me for sure. I went from thinking it's quite a ways away to, oh wow, it's actually quite close, kind of overnight. At least that's kind of how it feels. It always kind of sneaks up on me in that way. But it's it's a very interesting year for the Pac-12 for lots of reasons. So I just want to start kind of there across the conference as a whole. What do you like? What do you think this season is going to feel like, be like in this kind of, you know, on the doorstep of the end of the Pac-12? What do you think the vibe around this season is going to be, kind of as we go through it, because it's the last season of the Pac-12 as we know it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to feel different for different teams, right? For Arizona, USC, UCLA, even Colorado, you know, it's going to feel like we want to be that team that wins the final season of the Pac-12. Uh, Obviously, Arizona, Colorado are going to one conference. Oregon, USC, UCLA are going to another. So they're not going to get to play each other 2 times a year for a title ever again. For teams like Washington State, Oregon State, it's going to suck. It's, you know, they're the two teams that are kind of left out in the cold right now, don't know what they're going to do. There's been different talks about how they handle it, because if they can preserve the Pac-12, they can preserve the tournament shares. You know, maybe they reverse merge with the Mountain West. And then you've got the teams in the middle, right? Stanford and Cal, I think it's going to feel like any other season. They're leaving the Pac-12 for the ACC, but they don't really have teams that I think can contend for a Pac-12 title. Stanford might sneak its way into the tournament. So I hope it's going to be a really exciting season because of all that's at stake, right? If you can win, you're potentially the last champion of the Pac, whatever number. You know, it was the Pac-10 before the Pac-12. So, but you know, for some teams, it might just not feel that way, and that's unfortunate. But there's some really exciting players in the Pac-12. So even if the teams and the competition and the chase for a title aren't necessarily as exciting as they have been in the past, which I don't think they will be, I think it'll be really exciting. You still got plenty of high level college basketball athletes that, you know, I think you could put up against the top players in almost any conference, and the Pac-12 would be right there.
One of the things that stands out to me about this conference this season is just the depth. And I think we even talked about this with you last season, that outside of the obvious maybe 3 or 4 teams, there were a lot of question marks. You didn't necessarily feel great about some of the other teams. I look at this season and I feel like I can talk myself into most of the conference being at least halfway decent, maybe getting into the NCAA tournament conversation, in addition to the UCLAs and Arizonas of the world that obviously are loaded with talent, USC as well. How optimistic are you about the conference as a whole and the Arizona States of the world, the Stanfords, the Utahs, that this could be a conference where you're looking at 6, 7, 8 quality basketball teams, as opposed to some of the other years in recent memory where it's more of 4-ish teams that you feel like are NCAA caliber, and then there's a significant drop off after that?
Yeah, I think I said the other day that this season for the Pac-12 is probably the deepest in terms of NCAA tournament caliber teams that it has been since the 2015-2016 season when they got 7 in. I could talk myself into, I think, probably 8 teams. 9 if I stretched, how I look at the quality of athlete on those teams. And it's not super high, right? I think Arizona and USC are probably going to be maybe Colorado are probably going to be the top 25 teams. UCLA, Oregon, probably top 30, 35. And then from there, it's, can Washington pick up wins? Can Utah? Can Stanford? Is Arizona State's rebuilt roster good enough to be what they were last year? Like, those are all the questions you have to answer. But I do feel like it's, at least in the middle of the conference, it's the strongest middle the Pac-12 has had in almost a decade.
That makes me feel good that I'm not off about that, because that's kind of how I look at it too. Is there are, however it's going to shake out, there are just a lot of teams that, and I'm an optimistic person who likes to talk myself into teams. Josh knows this very well. And looking at the Pac-12, I really felt like I could do that. And you mentioned the top of the conference a little bit. That's where we wanted to go next. How do you see the top of the Pac-12 shaking out? It kind of feels like to me we've got probably 4 teams. You mentioned them: UCLA, USC, Arizona, Colorado, that are maybe a step above everybody else. How do you see those teams comparing to each other, and how do you kind of see the title race shaping up?
Yeah, I had Arizona at the top even before the Bronny James health scare. But I think for me, Arizona, USC are probably a tier gap above Colorado, UCLA, and Oregon. And I would throw Oregon in there. I think the talent for Oregon is, right there, especially the talent and the experience for Oregon. Right, Colorado and UCLA are going to be heavily reliant on some freshmen. Oregon really, they have their trio of freshmen, but they're going to be reliant on a lot of their veteran guys to get the job done. So I think there's probably it's probably 2 tiers for those 5, and obviously Colorado and potentially UCLA have the talent to jump into that upper tier if the freshmen deliver right away. But for me, I mean, the starting 5 that you have at Arizona of probably Boswell, Caleb Love, Pell Larson, Keisha Johnson, and Umar Ballo. I mean, that's a starting 5 that if you ignore the rest of the roster, where Jaden Bradley's the only proven commodity on that bench, that's a starting 5 that you could see making a potential Final Four run. I mean, it's that good. The depth there, especially with the way that Tommy Lloyd likes to play, is a little bit scary. And then for USC, it's the same thing, right? You've got Isaiah Collier, Boogie Ellis. My guess is that Kobe Johnson, DJ Rodman, and Joshua Morgan probably start. Bronny James could potentially bump one of those wings out, but I think coming off the bench, especially as he's going to come in probably mid-season, if he does play, is probably the right move. But that, again, that starting 5 is so good, and I just don't feel the same way about the starting 5 of anyone else in that conference.
How do you feel about Caleb Love as a basketball player? He's kind of one of those guys for me that strikes me as, for one reason or another, that it's hard. Like, he's just going to be the same player regardless of where he is and the system that he's in. Like, if he doesn't fit into kind of the mold of a system, it's hard to kind of force the type of player that Caleb Love is into that. How do you think he kind of fits into the way that Tommy Lloyd runs his offense? Do you think he'll carry a lot of the kind of the things that maybe you don't love about Caleb Love, or whether it's shot selection or just high volume that's not always the most efficient? What kind of Caleb Love do you think we'll see at Arizona? Do you think there will be some evolution there, or we're going to see a guy that looks very familiar from his time at Carolina?
Probably a little bit of both, right? I mean, Caleb Love, if there's any player in the country that you can make a semi 1-for-1 comp with Caleb Love for, it's Kirk Kriisa, right? So you're losing a guy in Kirk Kriisa that would shoot 2 for 13 on any given night, and replacing him with a guy that'll shoot 1 for 13 if the opportunity is right. I think having Boswell and Bradley there is going to do a lot to help rein in Caleb Love. Because remember, at UNC, he could do whatever he wanted. He was not leaving that starting lineup. If Tommy Lloyd finds that Caleb Love just isn't getting the job done, isn't distributing the ball well in transition, is taking ill-advised shots, pulling up for random threes in transition when he has a lane to the basket, he's going to put him on the bench. He's going to start Bradley and Boswell over him if they're the ones that are more efficient and the ones that are actually buying into Arizona's offense. So while I do think Caleb Love's always going to be Caleb Love, right? He's going to have those games where he shoots 20% from the floor and you feel like he lost them the game. Arizona's had that before and they've still been really good. And I also feel like now Arizona, which they didn't really before because Boswell was a freshman last year, they didn't really have that guy who could spell Kirk Risa and force Kirk Risa off the floor. Mm-hmm. Now Boswell is poised to be a breakout sophomore. Same with Jaden Bradley. So I feel like there's enough talent there where Caleb Love has to buy in on the offensive end to playing efficient basketball in order to stay on the floor for those 30 to 35 minutes that we're expecting him to get.
One more thing on Arizona, and this might be just a complete overreaction, but I asked this question with the caveat that I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Tommy Lloyd in his first 2 seasons at Arizona has gone 33-4 and 28-7, and those are 2 really really successful seasons. Then you get to the NCAA tournament, and the thing that we remember most about that run 2 years ago was that awesome game that they played against TCU in the round of 32, and then of course we know what happened last year in a loss to Princeton. Does it get awkward this year if Arizona is really good and then is underwhelming in the tournament, or is that just a complete overreaction and Tommy Lloyd's got plenty of time before we start asking that kind of question?
I think he's got plenty of time. Remember, they never made a Final Four under Sean Miller.
Right.
And Sean Miller was a very good coach. They always had very fantastic records. They made the second weekend multiple times, but they could never make it to April. The only reason Sean Miller was let go was because of all the NCAA violations or potential there to be caught for NCAA violations. If it wasn't for that, I feel like Sean Miller would still be the head coach for Arizona. I think when you start getting into it is when they hit the Big Ten and they're not consistently one of the top 2 teams in the conference and they're not consistently winning, 17 games in conference and 30 or 28 overall. But I think for right now, if they go through and they win 30 games and they make the Sweet 16 and then lose a game they probably shouldn't, I still feel like he's safe. The shadow of those violations is probably not hanging over the program right now, but if it was, that's going to be dissipated by the time they hit the Big 12. So I think you're not going to start hearing anyone call for Tommy Lloyd's job until they hit the Big 12, a conference where a top 25 team can struggle. Mm-hmm. So that's where it's going to really start. But if he has a great season in the Pac-12, they're not going to there's not going to be calls, I feel like, for a new head coach, especially as they're moving into a new conference.
Go ahead, Josh.
Let's stay on that theme for a second. Whether it's to have NCAA tournament success or to just make the NCAA tournament to have a good season, is there a coach or 2 that you're looking at as everybody kind of goes their separate ways here in the next 12 months after this season that is under the most pressure to, relative to expectations and relative to the program they're coaching, have a really good season?
Mike Hopkins at Washington. I feel like he has the talent right now. and the opportunity being in the Pac-12 to make a really good run at a tournament. If he does that, I think they keep him around during their transition to the Big Ten. If he doesn't, right? Remember, he's had a ton of talent and hasn't really had the success to match. Then you have to start talking about maybe his coaching philosophy is just not going to work, right? He's moving away from the zone this year, according to him and some of the other outlets that have spoken with him. So he it might look a little bit different, and he might be able to unlock some of that talent a little bit better. But I feel like right now it's Mike Hopkins. You could throw Jared Haas into that mix. I feel like he would have been gone if Stojakovic hadn't committed to Stanford. This feels like you've got one more chance. You've got one more star to try and turn into something, because he's gotten 5 stars, 4 stars, plenty at Stanford, and it just hasn't turned into anything. And because they turned down the opportunity to hire Mark Madsen, a Stanford alum, as their head coach, and Madsen went to their rival. If it doesn't work out for Haas, I feel like that's going to be a huge kind of black spot on the offseason. That's going to be where people point to, look, you should have just brought in the coach that you thought was better, not let him, especially if they finish behind Cal, because I think Cal's going to be pretty good this year. The only other team that I think, Bobby Hurley, I think, saved himself a lot last year. And so I don't think he'll be on the hot seat. I would just say Haas and Hopkins. But Bobby Hurley, if they have an awful season, you might start to hear those rumblings again.
You also have that kind of built in for a lot of schools, right? The built-in fresh start that might even push something forward earlier than it would otherwise. That maybe it's just okay, we're moving conferences. It's kind of a new start for everyone here in the athletic department. Maybe it's an opportunity to look somewhere else with a coach kind of on the opposite end of coaches who might need a good season to save their job. Do you think who's on the short list of teams that we might look up in January, or we might look up in the second week of February, and they've put together a season that is really surprising people relative to the expectations that they had going into the season in November?
I feel like the two right there. The first one, Cal. I think people are still going to view Cal as a year away from being good, just because they have a brand new head coach. They've been bad for so long. But I really like this roster as a middle of the road Pac-12 team compared to where they have been the past 5 years, which is bottom 2. And then Utah. Look, I think Utah brings in enough talent. It's Craig Smith's 3rd season. He's a good coach. I think, they went 10-10 last year, so right in the middle of the Pac-12. I think if they take that step forward, they could easily finish top 5. They could be that 5th place team in the Pac-12 and maybe knock off Oregon or something like that. And I wouldn't be surprised.
There is a fascinating collection of players coming into this conference this season, from Caleb Love to Xavier Wheeler to Eddie Lampkin. You can go down the list. Is there one that stands out to you that you're most excited about, most intrigued by, maybe one you think is flying under the radar with somebody like Caleb Love getting so much attention that you feel like is going to be a big part of this conference's story this season?
Oh, geez. I'm interested to see what Jalen Tyson does at Cal, because he was pretty good at Texas Tech. We know Fardaws Aimaq knows the system with Madsen. He played for Madsen at Utah Valley before transferring to Texas Tech. We know Jalen Cone is a high volume scorer that is a little bit undersized for his position, but he did pretty well at Northern Arizona. For me, I think it's that Jalen Tyson. He's probably the guy for Cal this year. Like that's kind of where his ceiling is. So I'm really interested to see that. And the only other, the other one is Cody Williams for Colorado, right? He has so much hype coming into this season, and I feel like Colorado needs him to deliver almost entirely on it if they're going to finish where people think they will in the top 3 or 4 of the conference.
Let's get into some team specific stuff and just kind of bouncing around the conference here with some specific questions about teams in the Pac-12. Let's start with the team that's on your hat, USC. How do you? So I kind of a two-part question here. I mean, it's not uncommon for USC to have a roster that is full of guys that you go, oh, I like that guy, and that's an impressive name. And this year it's not different, whether it's Isaiah Collier or Vincent Uwachukwu, Boogie Ellis is back, Kobe Johnson. You've kind of touched on some of these names. So the two questions I have for you here are, what do you feel like is the ceiling for this USC team, whether it's relative to the Pac-12 or relative to the country? And how much did Bronny factor into that, and how much does his unfortunate and scary medical situation impact how you feel about this USC team, with or if at some point they get him back on the floor this season?
For me, I think the ceiling for USC is now, if we're assuming Bronny doesn't come back, I feel like
Sure.
the ceiling is still Sweet 16, Elite 8. And I think it's unfortunate. Bronny and DJ Rodman got almost all of the press in the offseason because it's LeBron James and Dennis Rodman's kids, right? They're the third and fourth, maybe, best players on this team, right? You've got a 1-2 combo in that backcourt in Isaiah Collier and Boogie Ellis that is a top 5 backcourt in the country without Bronny James. So I feel like they're going to be really good. Bronny James gives them a different dynamic defensively that I think Andy Enfield, being the coach he is, especially on the defensive end, can really use. But if you've got Bronny James there, Kajani Wright, Iwachukwu all coming off the bench, and you can run 8 deep with those 3 guys, coming in 5-10 minutes into the game to give your starters a rest, like that's a team that can make the Final Four. But again, you need to understand that heart issues, and there's 2 of them on this team, right? You've got Bronny, you've got Vince. Those things are not easy to predict, right? It's not a standard injury where once you're back, right? Like they're going to continue to have to monitor it, play minutes around what they think they can. So right now, I'd say USC would probably be a team that I could easily see making an Elite 8 run. But if Bronny and Iwachukwu can play a full season and can play full, 15 to 20 minutes in the tournament or more, this is a team that could make it to Phoenix.
You mentioned Colorado and Cody Williams. That was the next team I wanted to ask you a little bit more about. I absolutely love Eddie Lampkin. I think he's getting slept on as one of the most impactful transfers in the country, maybe. You seem to have some reservations about if Cody Williams is not everything that he is expected to be, how far this Colorado team can go. You've got so many pieces coming back. There's an awful lot of talent here. What do you feel like the best case scenario is for this team if Cody Williams is what he appears to be? And do you see this as a very clear-cut top 25 team, Sweet 16 should be the expectation? Or do you feel like there's some work that needs to be done or some things you need to see to be convinced that this team is sitting in the rankings all season and right up there near the top of the Pac-12?
Yeah, I currently have Colorado unranked. I think, if they can if Cody Williams lives up to the hype and they can get valuable critical minutes for one or two of their other freshmen, redshirt freshmen. I'd probably see them in the top 25 most weeks. Their ceiling for me right now is still Sweet 16. Cody Williams doesn't need to be the scoring star. We can get that because Tristan Da Silva is that guy. KJ Simpson will give you scoring. I'm not sold on Eddie Lampkin in this rotation as, what Eddie Lampkin could be at TCU. I also don't know if Eddie Lampkin is capable of playing 25, 30 minutes a game. And I look, their other bigs are freshmen, and freshman bigs are notorious for being inefficient, foul happy. And so we're just going to need to see where that goes, because if they have to run Tristan Da Silva at the 5 for 20 minutes a game, like that's not a team that I'm really sold on. Because if Jop or Hurlbert, the two freshman bigs, don't step in and provide those valuable minutes, then you're looking at a lineup where you've got Da Silva at the 5, probably Luke O'Brien or Cody Williams at the 4. And that's not a lineup that excites me. So I'm gonna hold off my excitement on Colorado. I still think they're third or fourth in the Pac-12. I'm notoriously wary of freshman rotations that I haven't seen before.
Well, speaking of freshman rotations, the other team I wanted to ask you about in that vein is UCLA. This is a fascinating collection of players who have never played college basketball before, and then you've got Adembona and Dylan Andrews. But we're talking about, right, this collection of top 100 recruits, guys who are potential one-and-dones coming from the international game, and all of the unknowns that come with that. Clearly, there's an awful lot of talent Mick Cronin is working with here. What do you even make of just the massive overhaul of this roster, and how good do you feel like these freshmen are going to be? And do you share those same concerns with a team that's going to be so heavily reliant on so many freshmen?
I almost have more concerns about UCLA than I do about Colorado. Because remember, Colorado, they have a lot of freshmen, right? And they're not losing two of their program staples in the process of bringing these freshmen in. And by the way, if freshmen from the States have trouble adjusting, freshmen internationally have perhaps more trouble adjusting to the college game, the NCAA game. So Adembona, I have no issues. I think he's the best player on this roster. I think he and Lazar Stefanovic are going to be great scoring forwards and wings for this team. Dylan Andrews, Will McClendon rotating in and out at the 1 isn't Tiger Campbell, but I think it could get the job done to get them to a tournament. I would be surprised if this was a second weekend team. I'll leave it there. I think they're good. I think they're probably top 35, top 40, but I would be surprised if all of the freshmen work out in the way that Mick Cronin wants them to in year 1 to get them to a Sweet 16.
What have you heard specifically about the international freshmen? I mean, these are guys who we're talking about potential one and done, potential future lottery picks. They're not necessarily your typical international freshmen that are projects and you kind of see what you get. These are really highly established international players. Just as somebody who follows this conference closely, what have you heard about Inade Mara, and what do you expect him in particular to see this season with so many holes that need to be filled and replaced from last season's team?
Yeah, I think Ade Mara is probably going to come off the bench, which is good. Like he's not going to have to start. Obviously, they're going to start Adembona at the 5, and Mick Cronin hasn't been one to play two towers in the middle. I think you're going to see. I'm going to butcher his name first. Boyuktansel start. I have heard from people who have spoken with Mick Cronin that he is basically I don't even want to say a poor man's. He is a bigger version of Jaime Jaquez, or that is what his ceiling can be. Which if that's his ceiling, that's great. And then, look, you're going to have probably a long guard. If they don't start both Dylan Andrews and Will McClendon, then you're probably going to have like a Jan Vide starting at the 2, which I think could do well defensively, especially with the way Mick Cronin likes to play his defense. So I am interested to see what this lineup looks like, because at its best, Kenneth Nwuba is just a role piece. But if they don't step up, then you're looking at a 6th and 7th man of Will McClendon and Kenneth Nwuba, or potentially a 6th man of Nwuba and Will McClendon starting, which again, if that's where they are, it's going to be a relatively down season versus what UCLA has had the last 2 or 3.
Do you think is there a team in this conference that you are considering a true national title contender when the season starts in November?
When the season starts, no. I think the closest one to it, based on what we know, is Arizona. Mm-hmm. Look, they have a center that I think could be a center on a national title contender. They have a 4-man that was on a national, like he was on the runner-up last year, Keyshawn Johnson. I just, that backcourt for me, you need to see more from it to really, I mean, Caleb Love led his team to a national title game too. So they've got 2 guys who have played in the national title game. But we don't know what Boswell or Larson or Bradley or Visar are going to give you. So I'm going to hold off on proclaiming them national title contenders. I think at their ceiling, it's probably USC. I think USC has the talent to be the national title contender that we all think they should be. But I think for right now, I'm going to say no. But if it's one, if there is one, it's going to be one of those 2.
Yeah, I ask because I'm a big believer in, or I'm at least hesitant, just kind of by instinct, to throw teams into true national title conversations when at least some part of their program hasn't done it before, whether it's program success in general, coach success, player success. But it almost feels like, Arizona, you already talked about how Sean Miller, they never went to a Final Four under Sean Miller either. And of course, we touched on the NCAA tournament stuff, and even the guys like Caleb Love who are a part of that run. Maybe, I'm not giving him the credit he deserves, but I think there are the reasons why maybe you don't feel super confident in that a second time around are pretty evident. But it feels like the last, even though the Pac-12 hasn't had that depth necessarily the last few years, and it feels like there are only 3 or 4 high quality teams, even in those years, there was a team that really felt like it had the juice to make a deep run, that there were teams, despite the conference not being super strong, that had real aspirations of making a deep run. And maybe in this year where there's more depth, that it doesn't have that tippity top a talent that is kind of a shoe-in for the national title conversation right when the season starts.
Yeah, and remember, like, Arizona has 2 players that have been to a national title game. Their head coach was the first assistant and heir apparent to a program, and they went to 2 national title games. Oregon has a coach that's been to a Final Four. UCLA has had a coach that's been to a Final Four. So the coaches have that experience. Arizona, I believe, is the only one with players that have that experience. But you're looking at a bunch of brand new teams and not ones with the talent of like a Duke or a Kansas, or, well, Kansas is not entirely brand new, but like a Duke or a Kentucky,
sure,
where the talent is the top of the top, right? USC brings in a 5-star. Colorado brings one in, but the rest of the pieces around them were not traditionally viewed as 5 stars coming into college. So well, it's just wait and see at this point. If you told me the Final Four had Arizona and USC, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked. I'd be surprised, but I wouldn't be like, oh, that's out of left field. That, how did that happen? It wasn't like anything crazy happened. Like those two teams are good enough. It's just, can they do it 4 games, 5 games in a row to get to a title game?
Final question from me: when we get to Selection Sunday, get to conference tournaments March, and we're starting to kind of form the narrative for the NCAA tournament, where do you feel like the Pac-12 is going to fit into that conversation? How do you, I know this is asking you to look into the future a little bit, but how do you feel like we're going to look back on this season for the conference by the time we get to postseason play and are talking about who are our favorites for national, to win the national championship, how many teams each conference is getting in, where the conferences stack up, all of those conversations we have every season come March?
I think we're going to be looking at this as kind of almost the perfect swan song to the Pac-12. It's going to be one of the deepest years for the Pac-12. They're going to be on par, at least in terms of the number of teams that I think could get into the tournament, as like the Big Ten, the Big East. They're not going to win the national championship. I'll say that right now. A Pac-12 team will not win the national championship, which I feel like is the perfect swan song, because it's like, if they won, then it's like, oh, they won it, now they're going away. But if you don't expect them to win, I think they'll probably get 6 teams in. Getting 6 teams in and having 2 or 3 more that go into the NIT and can make some noise in those 2 tournaments. I feel like it's going to be good. You're going to look at Oregon State as probably being better, and if that's the worst team in your conference and it's getting better, that's a positive as well. And then they're going to go their separate ways, and people are going to be upset, and then they're going to realize, oh, we get to see Arizona play Kansas and Texas Tech and all these other teams, Houston and Baylor, every twice a week. We get to see UCLA take on Michigan and Michigan State and Purdue and those teams twice a week. Like, sign me up. And so I think it's going to take a while. I think it's going to take about a year after this season to be like, okay, the breakup of the Pac-12 was actually a good thing. But I feel like this season is going to be a good season to end on.
Love ending on an optimistic note there. Hopefully it comes to fruition. Thank you so much for taking the time to provide your Pac-12 expertise. Connor, we always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And sorry if my son was making too much noise. He gets into everything nowadays. So
no worries. We will just we'll add him to the feature on the title of the episode as well. We'll get him in there as well. Thanks so much, Connor.
All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Connor. Once again, at Hoops Hope CBB on Twitter. Always a pleasure to catch Connor and talk some men's basketball in the Pac-12.
I am so fascinated by this conference this season, truly.
Yeah.
Of just what in the world is going to happen. Because there are so many question marks, so many interesting possibilities, but things you don't actually feel confident in. Very few known quantities. I feel like I am ready for Pac-12 basketball. We need to be paying more attention to Pac-12. I guess you can call it Pac-12 after dark. I mean, football's off to a great start, like we were talking about. Hopefully that continues into basketball as well.
Caleb Love at Arizona not going smoothly is probably the thing that I'm putting the most stock into this year. Like, of the things I've passionately talked about in the preview series, Caleb Love is probably like I am adamantly against any basketball team that employs the services of Caleb Love in a very serious way. So if that goes really, really well at Arizona, then you could have a couple really good teams. Or if Arizona doesn't do well this year, then USC isn't exactly launching themselves into the elite of the elite conversations when they have a really good basketball team. So there's that side of it as well, that talent doesn't necessarily translate to elite outcomes when it comes to USC. So we could go one of two ways. We could have several really, really good basketball teams in this conference this year, or we could have several that kind of leave things to be desired.
Plenty of very interesting storylines to unfold heading into everybody dispersing after this season, and kind of where all of these programs are going to be at based off of what happens this season, and if that reinforces recent trends or if maybe something looks like it's going to be different as they head into their new conferences.
100%. You got anything else on the Pac-12 or Arizona, USC? Connor,
I did read this morning that Caleb Love's 2-point field goal efficiency, I believe it was, increased rather notably last season. Throw it out there.
Okay. Great. Super happy.
I was just caught off guard by it because that's not something I necessarily would have expected. I believe that is what I read in one of the athletic pieces. We shall see.
I kind of find that hard to believe. I'm not gonna lie to you. Let's see. Okay. It did take a sizable jump. Now he took almost a full 3-pointer more last season, and it dropped from 36% to 29.9%, and his overall field goal percentage didn't move. So I'm not sure I care that it jumped 8 percentage points in 2-point field goal range, because if he's just going to shoot 8 threes anyways and make only 29% of them,
yeah,
I don't really care. But that is a factually correct statement that he saw a sizable jump in his 2-point field goal percentage. So good job, Caleb Love. I still have no faith in you.
I figured there was a reason why that statistic in particular was the one that was highlighted. That would be why.
Yeah. He dropped 10 percentage points from the free throw line. Turn the ball over just as much. I don't have any faith, but good for him. I'm really excited.
Most interesting team in college basketball.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think you're probably right. All right. That's all we've got for you on the Pac-12. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod. Check out the YouTube channel as well. If you missed our conversation with Matt Majinski about the SEC and Kentucky basketball, that is on our feed and on our YouTube channel if you want to backtrack and catch that as well. This is podcast number 8 of what will be at least 12. There's more than that, right? We'll have a couple
big picture
awards and big picture things at the end. So conference specific pods previewing the season. This is number 8 of 12. You can catch all 8 that are already up, or 7, I suppose, other than this one, on our YouTube channel and our podcast feed. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh, and we will see you later.